This is the Mop Up. I'm David Feldman in New York City. Thank you so much for joining me. Please like this episode so I remain in your feed. Okay, contestants, $8 trillion in cash prizes at stake. You know the rules. 100 Senate seats. Democrats, well, you need a net gain of 4. 435 seats in the House of Representatives. Democrats, you only need a net gain of 3. One of the questions being asked this evening is, what's the matter with Kansas? Thomas Frank, who's been on this show, wrote that book 22 years ago, What's the Matter with Kansas? And he asked and answered, why does Kansas vote against its own economic self-interest? Well, things are changing. Democrat Laura Kelly is finishing up her second term as governor, Democrat. In August of 2022, voters rejected a constitutional amendment that would have outlawed abortion, and this month they rejected a measure that would have made it so that the Supreme Court justices in the state of Kansas would have to be elected. And that was seen as a way to pour more money into Kansas. Republicans trying to elect Supreme Court justices who are, quote unquote, pro-life. They rejected it. They said, no more. We're not going to allow you to politicize the Supreme Court, the state Supreme Court. Well, what happened to Kansas? Well, voters there learned the limitations of supply-side economics, starting in 2012, when Republican Governor Sam Brownback launched what he called the Kansas experiment. Well, they call states the laboratories of democracy. So, under the guidance of Arthur Laffer, this turd, Arthur Laffer, father of supply-side economics, the Laffer curve, Republicans slashed income taxes for the rich in Kansas, and they cut taxes for nearly 200,000 businesses completely. This is Reaganomics, the Kansas experiment. They would prove once and for all in this laboratory of democracy that cutting taxes for the job creators would balance state budgets by creating so much growth and so many high-paying jobs that Kansas's state treasury would be flooded with tax receipts. Well, it never worked before, and it didn't work in Kansas. Within 5 years, Kansas Republicans in the state legislature admitted defeat and eliminated all those tax cuts from the Kansas experiment, which failed. I mention all of this because there's a Senate race in Kansas. You've got the incumbent Republican Roger Marshall going up against Democrat and pastor Adam Hamilton, who founded the United Methodist Church of the Resurrection. He's a Democrat. He's got 26,000 members. It is the largest Methodist church in America. This is a pastor, Democratic pastor, running for Senate. Got the nomination. Now, he's not running on Medicare for all. He does want to expand on Medicare and Medicaid. He's presenting as a moderate. Obama loves him. He spoke at the prayer breakfast in 2012 for Obama's second inauguration. Well, how is Pastor Adam Hamilton doing? A new poll shows him 1 point behind his Republican opponent. Is Kansas in play? Is that one of the 4 seats the Democrats will pick up? Who knows? This is going to be an interesting race because along with James Tallarico, Democrats are reclaiming their Christianity. and forcing charlatans like Mike Johnson and Pete Hegseth to tell us, which part of the scriptures are you talking about? Things change, and we may wake up in the not too distant future and discover it's the Republican Party that is fighting to get God out of government. Well, there are two narratives coming off Tuesday's primaries in Wisconsin, and both those narratives are kind of wrong. The first narrative is, once again, the pollsters, they blew it. The second narrative is, well, the left-wing insurgency inside the Democratic Party finally hit its ceiling. Well, yeah, that's what the establishment Democrats want you to believe. So it all revolves around the Democratic primaries race for governor, the Democratic in Wisconsin, and the defeat of this woman, Democratic Socialist State Assemblywoman Francesca Hong, who all the polls said would prevail. And if you watch my last show near the end, I talked about her. And I said, it looks like she's going to win, and this is a problem for the Democratic Party. She lost, and she's an outlier. The pollsters did get it wrong, but not as badly as you're being told. This all started in Michigan, where polls show Dr. El-Sayed leading and defeating Congresswoman Haley Stevens by something resembling a landslide. Well, the polls were right and they were wrong. Dr. Sayed did win the Democratic nomination for Senate in Michigan, but the polls completely missed how narrow that margin would be. With Francesca Hong on Tuesday, the polls showed her winning big, and she lost. But what the polls did get right, or close to correct, was her percentage. She got pretty much what the pollsters said she was going to get. They were about 2 points shy. What pollsters missed was the percentage that David Crowley, who won, would get. He came on strong at the end, and the pollsters missed that. But this race was a complete mess. Last month, Crowley suspended his campaign to endorse Lieutenant Governor Sarah Rodriguez, who looked at the time like she had a better chance of defeating Democratic Socialist Francesca Hong. Then Rodriguez dropped out, and Crowley unsuspended his campaign 10 days later. Good luck polling that race. And Francesca Hong ended up losing to the more centrist David Crowley, as establishment Democrats, including Tony Evers, the governor of Wisconsin, were not only in the state of Wisconsin, but in a state of panic, fearing that Francesca Hong would get the nomination and then go on to lose the general, possibly dragging down the entire Democratic Party in Wisconsin with her. I'm not passing judgment. I'm just telling you what everybody is thinking, because Wisconsin is the swingiest of all swing states right now. They have Tony Evers, a Democratic governor, but they also have a state house controlled by Republicans. Their two senators are one of each: Tammy Baldwin, a Democrat, and Senator Ron Johnson, a cockroach and a Republican. They have a liberal state Supreme Court that has right now a 5-2 majority. These justices are elected, unlike Kansas, and those races have become incredibly expensive. The 5-2 majority, liberal majority in Wisconsin's Supreme Court, along with the Democratic governor, Tony Evers, kept Republicans in the state house from redrawing maps that would make it impossible for Democrats to win back control of the state house. Republicans control the State House, and they wrote some maps that would make it impossible for Democrats to win back the State House, and the Supreme Court, with its liberal majority, sent those maps back. Wisconsin has, by the way, 2 electoral maps. There are the maps for electing members of the State House of Wisconsin. That would be the State Senate and the State Assembly. And then there's a separate electoral map for the 8 members that Wisconsin sends to the House of Representatives in Washington, D.C. This is why Wisconsin is the state to watch heading up into the midterms. This is Hillary lost it, Biden won it, then Harris lost it. It is the swing state to watch, and this is why Democrats were so worried about Francesca Hung being the Democratic nominee for governor. Why? Well, this is right now, at this time in Wisconsin political history, it's the closest Democrats have come in nearly 16 years to winning control of either the Wisconsin State Assembly or the State Senate. Democrats in Wisconsin need a net gain of 2 seats to flip the state Senate blue. And Democrats need a net gain of 5 to flip the state Assembly blue. Democrats, again, I'm not passing judgment on Francesca Hung. I'm just telling you what the thinking here is. I like her. But Democrats did not want her, a self-avowed Democratic Socialist, a card-carrying member of the DSA, they did not want her topping the ticket as candidate for governor of Wisconsin. The thinking was, she was going to make the case for Republicans that Democrats have been taken over by the radical left, communists, so the story goes, who not only want to eliminate the police and prisons, but also want to put an end to Thanksgiving. This was the issue, right? She tweeted out that she hates Thanksgiving. Now, look, I agree with everything Francesca Hung wants and everything she has said in the past and has since taken back or deleted. Our prisons, she's right, and our police departments need to be rebuilt from the ground up. Abolishing them, however, is a stupid thing to say. Abolishing ICE, brilliant. But telling people you want to abolish prisons and the police without being given enough time to explain what you mean by that, bad politics. Lashing out at Thanksgiving as a holiday for European colonizers who are guilty of committing genocide on Native Americans is not only true, it's smart, and I believe the patriotic thing to say. I think we should ask what our holidays are actually about and why we celebrate them. It's a good conversation to have. Nobody wakes up in the middle of the night going, they're going to take away my Thanksgiving. The war on Christmas, now it's the war on Thanksgiving. Columbus Day, the war on Columbus Day. There is a war on Columbus Day. And it's not about Italians versus indigenous people. What is Columbus Day? It was the federal government at the height of Jim Crow telling Americans to stop lynching Italians because they're not black. They were saying, go after black people, but not Italians. Columbus Day is about making Italians white. When you read the origins of Columbus Day, it was the federal government telling the South, especially down in New Orleans, where you had a huge surge of Italian immigrants, it was the federal, and they began lynching, the Southerners began lynching Italians It was the federal government. I think it was Harrison, who was the president. I don't know. They were saying to white people in New Orleans, Italians are white. You can leave them alone. That's what Columbus Day is about. As I always say, Google it. So, Francesca Hong isn't wrong about anything, and she would do very well running in a civilized country, like in Europe, where you can have these conversations. Can't have them here in America. The problem for Democrats and Democratic socialists is all eyes are on Wisconsin heading into the midterms. And it, as I keep telling you, Wisconsin is split right down the middle. A Democratic socialist, a card-carrying member of the DSA, who might not be able to make the case for the DSA. She has little experience in government. She briefly serves as she's a newly elected assemblywoman. Democrats and AOC had a problem with Francesca Hong, as did Bernie Sanders. She didn't get their endorsement. Neither did the national DSA. So there's something going on. The state chapters of the Wisconsin DSA endorse Francesca Hong, but not Bernie, not AOC, and not the national chapter of the DSA. She was seen as a loose cannon. Not the hill for the left or the Democratic Party to die on in November. That's what they're thinking. That's what Bernie's thinking. That's what AOC is thinking. That's what the DSA is thinking. Leave a comment. Are they right? I have no idea. I don't live in Wisconsin. The feeling, however, among Wisconsin Democrats is if this is a wave election, remains to be seen, but if it is, Republicans will lose the Wisconsin State House or the Senate or both. And this is why Wisconsin is a must-win for Democrats in November. That's local politics, your governor and your state house, okay? Then there's the other map, control of the House of Representatives, different electoral map. And Democrats in Washington need to flip 3. They need a net gain of 3 seats. Well, Wisconsin sends 8 members to the House of Representatives in Washington, D.C. Okay, 435 members of the House. Democrats need a net gain of 3. And Wisconsin is where the DCCC is fishing. The congressional delegation to Wisconsin, 8 members of the House of Representatives from Wisconsin, 6 Republicans, and only 2 Democrats. So in a wave election where you have the swingiest of all swing states like Wisconsin, if it's a wave election, you're gonna pick off at least 1 seat. And then there's Max Miller, who is now the wife is suing him for posting photos of their 2-year-old child's genitalia on the internet. I told you, it's going to get worse for Max Miller. And he deserves it to get worse for him. He's a really bad guy. Okay. So, the House of Representatives, they've got 2 Democrats representing Wisconsin, and those 2 Democratic House seats are safe. Incumbent Congressman Mark Pocan represents Wisconsin 2. parts of Madison, Wisconsin, that is a solid blue district. I think Francesca Hung represents Madison, Wisconsin in the state assembly. And then you've got Democrat incumbent Gwen Moore, who represents Wisconsin 4, solid blue. It includes Milwaukee. Democrats need a net gain of 3 to win control of the House. Well, they're not going to lose 2 Democrats from Wisconsin. And they think Wisconsin 3, currently filled by the odious Republican Congressman Derek Van Orden, they think they might be able to flip him. And this is going to be a fun race because Van Orden has a violent temper. I've played clips of him going on television drunk, or maybe, I don't know if he was drunk. Maybe he had a mini stroke, but he's a very angry man who yells at Senate pages. He screams at the press. So Wisconsin 3, that is your bellwether. It is what to pay attention to. If it's a wave election, then the Democratic candidate running against Van Orden, that would be Rebecca Cook, who has never won elective office. She came close within just almost 3 points of beating Van Orden back in 2024. She's going to the House of Representatives if it's a wave election. And this is why Francesca Hung, the Democrats, including AOC and Bernie, they felt that she could not be the party's nominee for governor. It was too dangerous, especially when there's real opportunities here. So I am a leftist. I think you all know that by now. But I also see how stupid and easily frightened American voters have been trained to become. It used to be television reduced politics to sound bites. Now it's a series of grunts. Republicans talk to voters like they're cavemen. Jihad is bad. Communist bad. Freedom good. Socialism bad. Liberty good. The head of the Republican senatorial campaign is South Carolina Republican Senator Tim Scott, who is now calling Dr. El-Sayed Hamas. Not even he's a Hamas sympathizer, just Hamas. This is what we're up against because it works. It works. It's not fair. It works. Here you have Wisconsin 3, Van Orden, Congressman Van Orden. Imagine if you're the DCCC and you think you can flip this district. What kind of district is it in Wisconsin? Well, it's mostly white, but it's a mix almost right down the middle between rural and small cities. Who are you going to run? Ask yourself, who are you going to run to beat Van Orden in this district? A self-described Democratic socialist? Would you put up a candidate like AOC in Wisconsin 3? We have about 81 days until the midterms. Early voting in Wisconsin starts in 68 days. It's a little late for Democrats to make the case to voters in Wisconsin 3 that socialism isn't a dirty word, that Medicare for all and breaking up the monopolies is actually good for capitalism. And that's Wisconsin 3. You can't have that debate in 68 days. So Democrats, once again, are running a self-described blue dog. What's a blue dog? They're blue because they're oxygen deprived. They're problem solvers. Josh Gottheimer is a blue dog. They're running a fundraiser, a problem solver, a woman who represents everything that's wrong with the Democratic Party. That being said, Rebecca Cook may beat Van Orden because if this is a wave, if it's a wave, that's one of those 3 seats Democrats need to flip. So what do you do if you're head of the DCCC? Well, you're probably part of the establishment Democrats, so you would never run somebody who Bernie and AOC approve of. But I don't think Wisconsin, until we change the discourse in our country, and that's going to take a while, I don't think you win running socialists in Wisconsin 3. I do believe, however, that if the Democrats want permanent majorities in state houses across the country, in Congress, the White House, and eventually the Supreme Court, they have to resemble democratic socialists without calling themselves democratic socialists. They have to mimic the Nordic model, the Scandinavian model, where capitalism competes with socialism. But, as I said, the midterms are 2.5 months away. Yes, it's time for Democrats to start now, but not in Wisconsin 3. We have a very successful Democratic Socialist mayor whose popularity numbers are through the roof right now. So, okay, the story coming out from Tuesday is that the left hit a ceiling all because Francesca Hong lost her race for governor. Well, the left created that ceiling. The left didn't want her to win, even though she's a Democratic Socialist and a card-carrying member of the DSA. Just because someone is a leftist, just because someone wants all the right things, it doesn't mean they're the right person to represent those things or to try to implement them. And by the way, the media, the Republicans and the media, local media, I see these clips everywhere, they love DSA members like Francesca Hong. All the clips I see now on television, especially from local news, it's some idiot defending the DSA. That's the rule inside of every television newsroom. You basically do what Fox News does. You get a really good, smart, sharp conservative, and then you find the dumbest Democrat and put that idiot on Fox News, so Fox News viewers go, fair and balanced. So the rule in the newsrooms now is find me a young, stupid socialist who can't answer, how are you going to pay for it? Which is a question they never ask Republicans when they vote in favor of Trump's tax cuts for billionaires. Like 1/3 of our national debt is because of Trump, but nobody asks the Republicans, how are you going to pay for that? But you find a young, idealistic socialist, how are you going to pay for it? It's a tired trope. Smug TV, local TV reporters interviewing a wide-eyed optimist, a 20-something, who may not know how you're going to pay for it, but they know right from wrong. And what they do, this is the trope, you trip them up on some obscure policy question that is guaranteed to make them, and therefore socialism and big government, seem stupid. But Americans aren't buying it this time around. Americans are not buying it. We have some polls coming in. Susan Collins is going up against Troy Jackson. And we have our first poll since Troy Jackson, former president of the Maine Senate, we have our first poll since he replaced Graham Plattner. And what's happening is what was going to happen if Plattner stayed on the ballot. It's tightening. But Troy Jackson, Democrat, is still holding on, according to this one poll, Troy Jackson is still holding on to the lead that Plattner had before he was forced to quit, right before he was forced to quit. Before he was forced to quit, it looked like he was going to win by a landslide. So this race was going to tighten, whether it was Plattner or Troy Jackson. By the way, that's a Fox News poll showing Susan Collins, Republican, down by 2 in Maine. Meanwhile, they're doing everything they can to destroy Troy Jackson. The Bangor Daily News reporting that when Troy Jackson was 19 years old back in 1988, he was arrested for kicking open somebody's door and punching a man in the face, and that resulted in a misdemeanor charge and a fine. Well, he was a Republican back then, and so far so good, right? I mean, this is how you win Republican voters who, right, think that's a good thing. Troy Jackson, now saying, yeah, that story is true. I did. I kicked open a door and punched a guy in the face. But according to the police reports and the Bangor Daily News, Jackson's partner, life partner, who he is still with, I believe she's his second cousin. That's that's one of the downsides to being in a long-term relationship with your second cousin. It's really hard to break it off. But according to the police report, according to a police report from 38 years ago, Troy Jackson, according to the police, and when do they ever lie, he shoved his girlfriend, who he is still with. I think they have kids together, but they never married. And so maybe she said to the police when they showed up, he shoved me or he pushed me. She now says she has no recollection of him ever shoving her. But at the time, he was a Republican, so he probably did shove her. I don't know the story. I suspect he was about to punch this guy, and maybe I don't know. Maybe she said, don't do it, and he kind of said, get out of my way. And I'm not defending it. I'm just telling you what I think happened. And I think he might have. If you're going to punch a guy and somebody gets in your way, I'm not defending it. Chances are you're going to push somebody out of the way. Well, more good news that's not good news for Democrats. I mean, they're trying to find anything they can about Troy Jackson. Meanwhile, Max Miller is accused of posting pictures of his 2-year-old's genitalia on the internet. He's accused of breaking her collarbone, holding a gun to his ex-wife's head, and smashing her face into a wall. That's just the tip. There's others. I was reading the American Prospect last night. That's just the tip of what this guy. Troy, you shouldn't shove women. But we don't know. How do we know if that happened or not? More good news, though, for the left, which we're being told hit a ceiling Tuesday night. Peggy Flanagan beat the centrist Democrat Angie Craig for the race for the Democratic nomination for Senate. Tina Smith, Democrat, is retiring. Lieutenant Governor Peggy Flanagan, supported by Bernie, supported by AOC, she beat the centrist Angie Craig. Good night, Tuesday. That's way more important than Francesca Hung. Also in the race for Minnesota 2, AIPAC went down to defeat as Matt Little from the left defeated Democrat Matthew Klein. AIPAC invested $3 million to defeat Matt Little in Minnesota 2. My pillow guy, Mike Lindell, this is bad. This is really bad for Trump. And I'll tell you why in a second. The My Pillow guy, Mike Lindell, was running for the Republican Party's nomination for governor of Michigan. He was endorsed by Donald Trump. Mike Lindell was defeated. And what's he doing? You guessed it, Mike Lindell is refusing to accept the results. He's claiming fraud, voter fraud. So Mike Lindell, history admits to the crack, being a crack addict. He's gone bankrupt. He's been sued by Dominion, Smartmatic, all the voting machine companies for saying all the things that Donald Trump is still saying about the 2020 election. And he's defeated by a Republican, not a Democrat. And he's accusing her or Democrats of stealing the election. That doesn't make Donald Trump look good. Nothing makes Donald Trump look good. Okay, this is the Mop-Up. I'm David Feldman in New York City. Thank you for joining me. Please hit the like button so I remain in your feed. Please share this episode and go to my website, go to davidfeldmanshow.com. If you would like to read the articles that I read to prepare this show, hit the show prep menu, leave a comment, and all that kind of stuff. And I have a fan club. I started my own fan club. I am the permanent president pro tem of the David Feldman fan club. All right. The embattled chairman of the DNC, that would be the Democratic National Committee, Ken Martin, is a product of Minnesota. A lot going on in Minnesota. He ran the Democratic Party in Minnesota. He was chairman of the Democratic Farm Labor Party, which is the Democratic Party in Minnesota. And he did that job for 14 years. They don't have a Democratic Party in Minnesota. They have a Democratic Farm Labor Party. So it tells you where Minnesota's heart is, or at least the Democrats. Ken Martin is a good guy. He's center-left, and he's getting beaten up by the establishment Democrats. I like Ken Martin. When Mamdani looked like he was going to win, around the time, I think it was like October of last year, Martin was one of the first Democrats to embrace him, saying, this is a big tent party. There's room for Democratic socialists. Ken Martin. And he said, there's room for Mamdani. That's good to hear the chairman of the DNC saying that. And that's one of the reasons Ken Martin is getting so much negative press right now. Establishment Democrats hate Ken Martin. They call him incompetent, And The Nation has a great story this week on why the Democratic establishment is gunning for the chairman, Ken Martin. It looks like he's about to ban dark money from Democratic presidential politics. If all goes as planned, the Democratic Party will forbid candidates running for president inside the Democratic Party engaging in the debates. You will not be able to take dark money from super PACs or cooperate with dark money super PACs. This is a threat to James Carville, Mark Penn, David Axelrod, everybody who advised the Clintons and the Obamas and Harris and Biden. So when you hear Democrats say, we got to get the money out of politics, I know it's a problem. They'll say, we need a constitutional amendment. This is what they say. We need a constitutional amendment to overturn the Citizens United decision, which opened up the floodgates for dark money. I think it was 2010. When they say, and this is what they say, establishment Democrats, we need a constitutional amendment to overturn Citizens United. What they're really saying is, we love dark money. We love Citizens United. And yeah, we want a constitutional amendment to overturn Citizens United. And we'll take dark money to start a campaign to pass a constitutional amendment that overturns Citizens United. They would take dark money to get rid of dark money because they know dark money, they know a constitutional amendment to get rid of dark money is never going to happen. So what do? If you know dark money is wrong, and we know, you see it with AIPAC, you see it with the cryptocurrency lobbyists, you see it with health insurance companies. They own Washington, D.C. So how do you get rid of dark money? We're hamstrung by the Citizens United decision. Go F yourself. Go F yourself. And this is why I love Ken Martin. The way you keep dark money out of politics is you forbid it. You do what Ken Martin, do what Bernie and AOC do. We don't take it. We don't take dark money. And it looks like, at least according to The Nation magazine, Ken Martin, chairman of the Democratic National Committee, appears to be banning dark money from our party. Just because dirty money is out there, it doesn't mean you have to accept it, Barack Obama. He was the one who started it. He refused in 2008. He was such a prodigious fundraiser. He said, no, I'm not going to take federal matching funds. I can do this. I got David Geffen. I'm going to raise money all on my own. And I think it was in The Nation where they said it went from, before Obama, 20 cents out of every $100 was dark money. After Obama, $8 out of every $100 that the Democrats spent was dark money. Went from 20 cents out of every $100 to $8 out of every $100. That's from The Nation magazine, and I don't have it in front of me. But if you go to Show Prep over at the David Feldman Show, you can read The Nation magazine, which you should subscribe to. You don't have to take the money. Just because all the cops on the beat are taking money doesn't mean you have to take the money. So Ken Martin, I like this guy. Well, I'm not an incrementalist. I know that incrementalism is dangerous. But I also know you have to accept that change doesn't happen overnight and that revolutions, like the Reagan Revolution, the Gingrich Revolution, Bernie's Revolution, it doesn't happen overnight. It seems that way, but no. Hemingway, I think I'm quoting Hemingway. He said, you go broke gradually and then all at once. I think that's what he said. And I think what he was saying was there are things going on under the surface that you don't see, and then all at once you go, oh my God, there's been a revolution. Donald Trump was a revolution. And all at once. Happened gradually and then all at once. By the time he was perceptible, it was too late to stop him. Why is this happening? Why is this happening? Well, there's been an erosion of America's leftist values that started in November of 1972 after George McGovern lost to Richard Nixon in a landslide. Democrats have never recovered from 1972. George McGovern, one of the greatest men of the 20th century. So Jimmy Carter was a reaction in 76 to McGovern losing so massively to Richard Nixon. And the lesson Democrats took from that was to elect a moderate Democrat, Jimmy Carter, who ran on deregulation. And as I talked about in the last show, Tip O'Neill and Teddy Kennedy, who are the liberals, or were the liberals in 1976, they sabotaged his presidency because he was moving our country to the center. We were way more. I mean, Nixon gave us the Clean Water Act and the EPA. Well, Ralph Nader gave us all that, but Nixon was forced to sign that into law. So Nixon, the Democrats never recovered from McGovern. And McGovern wrote a great piece, 20 years ago in The Nation, saying, sometimes you lose, but you end up winning. He said, I lost in 72 to Nixon, but in 2 years, he was gone. So anyway, Nixon won in a landslide in 72, and that was 1 year after the famous Powell memo, which jump-started the brainwashing of America. Because of the Powell memo, complaining about Ralph Nader specifically, the Powell memo has contributed to making it impossible to have a serious discussion right now about Medicare for all. Because of the Powell memo, we now have these think tanks. We have a war being waged on academia, our public schools, science. All began with the Powell memo, which was an assault on reason. He writes, if you want to protect capitalism and your fortunes, you have to indoctrinate an entire generation of Americans to think differently. And by thinking differently, he meant not to think, to lose all critical thinking. This is why, in 2026, a good chunk of our electorate is immune to facts, and they have no idea how to differentiate between what's important and what's a strategically planned deflection. It's a lack of critical thinking. Right now, everyone is talking about Donald Trump getting stuck inside that catering container forced to fly home from the NATO summit, Turkey in a decoy jet, because the Iranians were coming for him. And people are talking about, who did he leave behind on Air Force One? But that would go down if the Iranians, God forbid, shot it out of the sky. And who did he choose to keep alive with him on that private plane? Is he sleeping with Natalie Harp? Well, that's a nice deflection. Who cares? But people are talking about that because it's much easier to report on Trump being humiliated other than the really difficult and brutal realities, like Iran has 80% of its drone and missile capabilities left, and the Washington Post out with a story that we've gone through two-thirds, I don't know, either 1/3 or 2/3 of our Reaper drones. We're running out of Reaper drones. Politico just reported that Europe is all out of Patriot missiles. Those are the things that shoot incoming out of the sky. Donald Trump and war criminal Pete Hegseth accused the Wall Street Journal, they accuse the Washington Post, any reporter is treasonous, giving aid and comfort to the enemy to report the truth, that we don't have enough weapons. And how do they know that? Because it's what Pete Hegseth and the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, Dan Kane, are telling Congress and what people are leaking. America, I love my country and I root for my country. We're out of weapons and we can't replenish them. It's going to take until 2029. We barely have any Patriots. I think 1/3 of what we're supposed to have is left. We don't have enough Tomahawks and long-range missiles to even repeat what we did to Iran at the beginning of this year, back on February 28th. We're out of shock and awe. That's precisely why Donald Trump keeps threatening to wipe out Iran's entire civilization. That's all he's got. And he and Hegseth call it treason if you tell the truth. They can't do anything about Iran. Hegseth is now our war secretary. It's now called the War Department, meaning he's looking for a war, not to defend America. He's looking for a war. And he is discovering when he's sober, I don't know if you saw him sweating the other day. Some people are saying, anyway, he's discovering we can't go to war because we don't have enough ammunition, we don't have enough soldiers, and we don't have any allies. And most importantly, we don't have the political will at home to go to war. And you know who knew that? And you know who said that? The chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, Dan Kane. He said to Trump in mid-February, don't do this. We need our European allies. Iran is thousands of miles away. He said, we don't have enough munitions. And trust me, Mr. President, the political will doesn't exist for you to start sending our soldiers off to their deaths once again in the Middle East. Well, where are we right now? Our $1 trillion a year military budget isn't about going to war. If you want war, the Pentagon says that costs extra. You need a war supplemental. So you just don't go to war. There's a reason it's not so easy, or it's supposed to be difficult to go to war. Had Trump gone to Congress first and gotten a war authorization, then we could have prepared and budgeted for this war. We could have built up our military. We could have spent $500 billion speeding up production of all the missiles and interceptors we would need. And you know what? Iran would see that, and they'd say, oh, well, we better do something. We better listen to Trump. So you build up to go to war, so people are afraid of you. You plan for a war. Even George W. Bush planned for the war in Iraq. He waited almost 2 years before going in to Iraq. He still lost, but Trump and Hegseth are a different kind of stupid. They love military parades. They love watching our jets flying over in formation. It makes them think we can do anything. Well, we can't. Because war is a dirty business, and you don't enter into it unless all other options have been exhausted. The Wall Street Journal just reported, brace yourself, this is Rupert Murdoch's Wall Street Journal reporting that Ukraine defeated the U.S. military in a war game staged in early spring of this year. It was a war game at our Joint Multinational Readiness Center in Germany. That's where we play war games. We sent soldiers who were stationed at Fort Hood, Texas. We sent them to Germany to stage a battle with Ukrainian troops, especially their drone operators. And according to Stars and Stripes, which covers the Pentagon, as well as the Wall Street Journal, Ukrainian troops defeated our military in this war game. Ukrainian troops had superior drone capability and were able to locate and destroy all our tanks, our soldiers, and defeat them thankfully, it was just a war game. Well, that's what $1 trillion a year in military spending gets you. And now Pete Hegseth wants $1.5 trillion, $1.5 trillion for 2027 for the budget. But it's treason to tell the American people this. Literally, that's what Pete Hegseth says. Hegseth called this type of reporting in Stars and Stripes and Wall Street Journal, which is run by Rupert Murdoch, they call that treason. Like I said, no more sound bites, grunts. They talk to us like we're the cave people. Truth, treason. Truth means you on side of enemy. Enemy bad, America good. ProPublica out with more treason, reporting that General Dynamics, the big war contractor, and I just found out General Dynamics wasn't a general. I always thought there was a war hero, a war hero named General Dynamics. Now, he doesn't exist. There's no General Dynamics. No General Electric either, turns out. I thought there was a General Eddie Dynamics who won the won Iwo Jima for us. Nope, no Eddie Dynamics. It's a made-up name. General Dynamics is the big war contractor. This is ProPublica out with some treason. Now, General Dynamics was given a $535 million contract to build artillery shells in their Mesquite, Texas factory. And they have failed to manufacture how many artillery shells? Would you like to guess? We gave them $535 million to produce artillery shells, which we've been making for at least a century. How many do you think they were able to produce? None. Couldn't do it. ProPublica and DropSite News reporting that despite that, General Dynamics continues to receive multi-billion-dollar orders from our Pentagon. This is this week, ProPublica. So, yeah, reporting on Trump cowering in a catering container and needing a decoy jet to fly home from Turkey is an important story, but not the way the news media reports it. It's important because it should tell you our Secret Service, our military, is completely spooked. They don't think they can keep our president safe from Iran. That's the story. If the commander-in-chief of the U.S. military is sneaking out of Turkey in a catering container because he's afraid of Iran, you lost the war. Especially when Donald Trump is all about symbolism. That is a metaphor, not a metaphor, it's what you do when you've lost. Why is he cowering in a catering container, flying on a decoy jet? Because we lost the war with Iran, and he's terrified. He can't get the Iranians to open up Hormuz. And, you know, everyone knows it. The Persian Gulf states right now, which are being attacked by Iran, they're reportedly reaching out to Tehran, the leadership, and starting to negotiate what? The terms of surrender? What they're saying, what is necessary for you to allow us to pass through the Strait of Hormuz? Oman, which is on the other side of Hormuz, is negotiating with Iran to figure out a way to open up the strait. Iran is saying, we control Hormuz and there's nothing Donald Trump can do about it. And Donald Trump says, no, you're begging me for a deal. And they're going, why don't you try to pass some ships through Hormuz, and we'll show you how much we're begging to do a deal with you. They're saying we control Hormuz. And they're saying, doesn't open up until you remove all your troops and ships from the Persian Gulf and Israel pulls out of Lebanon. And all the Persian Gulf states, from what we're reading, all the Persian Gulf states that Iran attacked this year seem to be coming hat in hand, asking for permission to go through the Strait of Hormuz. Well, the new Republican talking point is, Hormuz is irrelevant. We're building, our allies are building pipelines so the oil can be shipped out of Saudi Arabia via the Red Sea. We don't need Hormuz. Well, if you've listened to this show, you know all about the Bab el-Mandab Strait. And I'm going to get to the USS Abraham Lincoln. But first, some graphics. Persian Gulf, Suez Canal, Red Sea, and the Bab el-Mandab Strait. Okay? That's how it works. One more time. I have a different graphic because this is fun. Persian Gulf, Suez Canal, the Red Sea, the Bab el-Mandab Strait. Okay. I would just rather look at that all day. What am I doing here? I have no idea. What does this do? Oh, that would be the Strait of Hormuz. That would be the Bab el-Mandab Strait. See? Okay. That's good. I like that. That would be... let me just do this for the rest of my life. I could do this all day. Okay. So I told you that Republicans are saying, oh, who needs the Strait of Hormuz, where 25% of the world's oil and 30% of the world's fertilizer comes out of? We're going to build pipelines so the oil from the Persian Gulf can go across Saudi Arabia and then be shipped to the rest of the world via the Red Sea. Okay. But remember the Houthis in Yemen? They are now firing, once again, on ships in the Red Sea. Pete Hegseth, the first thing Trump did when he returned to the Oval Office was bomb the Houthis. And he said, we won. No, they're still firing on ships in the Red Sea and still firing into Israel. And we've just learned that the military has admitted to killing close to 200 civilians in that bombing attack. In those bombing attacks, the military just sent paperwork to Congress admitting to killing roughly 200 innocent civilians in Yemen starting in March of last year when Trump and Hegseth phoned in those airstrikes. Well, if that's what the military's admitting to, what about the Somalis in that refugee camp? So, war crimes, and you lost. You lost that. You lost that war. The Houthis in Yemen now firing on ships in the Red Sea. At the end of July, the Houthis attacked 2 Saudi tankers in the Red Sea. On Tuesday, the Houthis killed 6 crew members on board an Egyptian-owned cargo ship trying to pass along the Bab el-Mandab Strait. Let me show you the Bab el. That's the Persian Gulf. That's the Suez Canal. All right, that's the Red Sea, and to get through the Red Sea, you got to go through the Bab el-Mandab Strait. This is economic terrorism, for which there's no military, only a diplomatic solution. And this is why the pipelines aren't an alternative to the Strait of Hormuz. First of all, pipelines can't compete with tankers. Tankers are the most efficient way to move massive amounts of oil. Secondly, pipelines going through Saudi Arabia are meaningless if tankers sailing through the Red Sea are being fired upon by the Houthis in Yemen. Here, look. That's the Strait of Hormuz. So Saudi Arabia, the pipelines will just go through the Red Sea and out through the Bab el-Mandab Strait, where Yemen is now firing on ships. So an Egyptian cargo ship, trying to pass through the Bab el-Mandab Strait on Tuesday, ending up with 6 dead sailors means the Suez Canal could be rendered useless, right? The whole point of the Suez Canal in Egypt. The whole point was to save time and money, not having to go around all of Africa to get things to Asia and Africa. So what are we going to do? Well, it would be nice if before going to war, somebody said to Pete Hegseth and Donald Trump, Strait of Hormuz, Suez Canal, where half the world's shipping containers pass through, and they need to get through the Bab el-Mandab Strait. And the Houthis are proxy fighters for the Iranians, and they can do to the Bab el-Mandab Strait what the Iranians are doing to Hormuz. You don't have to sink a ship to shut down Hormuz or the Bab el-Mandab Strait. You just have to tell Lloyd's of London, we put some mines in there, and then it becomes too expensive to get the insurance for the tankers to pass through there. Just need to sink fire on one or two tankers. It's economic terrorism. And there's no military solution, only diplomatic solutions, like paying the Houthis not to fire on your tankers. That's how it's done. When you bomb, instead of pay, you end up paying the military-industrial complex, and then eventually the Houthis. So we can't get the Iranians to open Hormuz. All we can do is fire on ships. You're not going to believe this, but on Tuesday, a Navy helicopter fired 2 Hellfire missiles into the engine room of a Panamanian tanker that was attempting to pass through the Strait of Hormuz. Think about this. Think about what we accept as normal. We just fired on a Panamanian tanker because that's all we can do. We are doing what? Aiding and abetting the enemy, Iran, by firing on ships trying to pass through Hormuz. This is insanity. This is insanity. Look at what he's doing to the White House. Look at how the White House looks. That's not normal. Iran has closed down Hormuz. And in some bizarre and twisted show of force, Donald Trump and Pete Hegseth are attacking ships passing through Hormuz. By the way, Panama, I'm not an expert on these things. Last time I checked, Panama is our ally. They even kicked China out of the canal, and now we're firing on Panamanian tankers. We're firing on our allies to prove what? This is insanity. So if I ran a newsroom that had to answer to stockholders, I would just talk about Trump being stuck in a container, a catering container. Because this stuff, how do you explain this other than America? You're insane. You're insane and you're stupid. You're committing a global act of suicide. How do you explain it? Marco Rubio, our Secretary of State, explained it under testimony before Congress last month. He said, he was asked, why is our military firing on ships that belong to our allies? And Marco Rubio strutted and said before Congress, if Iranians refuse to open up Hormuz, if they want to cut off 20% of the world's oil supply, then we're going to do it for them. He literally said that. And he did it in a tone of voice where if you're only listening to the music, if you just listen to the menacing drum beats, you think, yeah, we're going to do it for them. But some of us listen to the lyrics and they realize this is insanity. He's literally saying, if we can't beat them, we're going to join them. We're going to help them. That's what he's saying. Well, obviously, this is one of the reasons you avoid war at all costs. Because when you do go to war, you need not just congressional approval and funding, you need the American people behind that war. And you do that by proving to the American people before asking them to go to war that you've exhausted every other option. You don't go to war because Donald Trump needs to look strong. That only makes you look incredibly weak and incredibly stupid. How, Mr. President, are you going to pay for it? I see all these 20-something Democratic Socialists of America being put on television, and the anchorman, how are you going to pay for it? How are you going to pay for this insanity? How are you going to stop the Houthis, Iran's proxy fighters in Yemen, from shutting down the Bab el-Mandab Strait? Well, if you're all about bromides and flag waving and patriotism, you just say we're the greatest country in the history of civilization and nobody pushes us around. Yeah, they do. Nobody pushes us around. We spend more on weapons than all the other industrialized countries combined. Yeah, we do. And we still get pushed around. And we still haven't won a war since World War II. We spend more on weapons than the rest of the industrialized world combined. But we keep losing wars. Well, what's wrong with this equation? We spend more on weapons than the rest of the world combined. But when it comes to our soldiers, not so much. That might be one of the reasons we keep losing wars. When we see Vietnam vets still living on the streets, Iraqi war vets, vets from Afghanistan with untreated PTSD, we think maybe we should spend a little less on weapons and more on our soldiers. And it turns out Hormuz and the Bab el-Mandab Strait can't be opened up with weapons. You need diplomacy. And if that doesn't work, you need soldiers, and we don't have enough. We don't have enough soldiers, and we don't have the political will back home. Nobody wants to sacrifice our soldiers just because Donald Trump can't admit he's insane and stupid. We cannot protect ships trying to pass through Hormuz, so we sink them. That's what we're doing. We can't protect the Persian Gulf states from Iranian missile attacks. What are they doing? They're starting to buy cheaper and more effective drones from Ukraine, realizing that the United States really can't help them. Last week, we saw what is called the Mecca Joint Defense Agreement. It was signed in Saudi Arabia. And the Mecca Joint Defense Agreement makes it so that any attack on Saudi Arabia, Turkey, or Pakistan is an attack on all three, kind of like the NATO alliance. Is it Article 4? It's Articles 4 and 5 the NATO alliance. Well, what does the Mecca Joint Defense Agreement really mean? It means Saudi Arabia is looking to negotiate with Iran, and they want to use Turkey and Pakistan as back channels. It was Saudi Arabia, along with Benjamin Netanyahu, who pushed Trump to attack Iran back on February 28th. Saudi Arabia kept calling, fight harder, you need to send in ground troops. But it's turned out to be both a disaster for the United States, Israel, and Saudi Arabia. Because Saudi Arabia can't get their tankers through Hormuz, and it's starting to look like they can't get their tankers through the Bab el-Mandab Strait. There we go, right? Strait of Hormuz. Ship it through to Saudi Arabia, but you can't get through the Bab el-Mandab Strait. So you can't get your oil out. The Iranians fired hundreds of missiles and drones into Saudi Arabia this year. Most of them were shot out of the sky, but they're out of Patriots. Serious damage was done to Saudi refineries. The Prince Sultan Air Base in Saudi Arabia was defenseless, kept getting hit by Iranians. The Iranians destroyed an American AWACS. That's a $750 million surveillance plane, one of only a handful that we have. It's the eyes and ears that is supposed to keep Saudi Arabia safe. Iran humiliated the United States in the eyes of Saudi Arabia. Iran destroyed our CIA headquarters in Riyadh, Saudi Arabia. Think about that. Iran destroyed our CIA headquarters in Saudi Arabia. You know how bin Laden flew a jet into the Pentagon? That was for symbolism. What's the symbolism in the Persian Gulf when Iran is able to destroy our CIA headquarters in Saudi Arabia and an AWACS? Look up, find out what an AWACS is. How many years does it take to replace an AWACS? Saudi Arabia doesn't feel safe relying on the United States. And what ships can we send to protect tankers in the Red Sea? What can we do other than fire on ships passing through Hormuz? And what are we going to do now? Fire on ships passing through the Bab el-Mandab Strait so they can't go through the Suez Canal, where nearly 40% of the world's container ships must pass? Who are we going to send down to the Gulf of Aden over there to open up the Bab el-Mandab Strait? Who are we going to send into the Red Sea to protect not just Saudi tankers, but every container ship trying to pass through the Suez Canal? You're going to send our entire Navy? 40% of our active fleet is in the Persian Gulf right now. You're going to send our whole Navy? To do what? To do what we're unable to do now? You know what China is thinking? Hey, this is as good a time as any to invade Taiwan. It's starting to look like the aircraft carrier, the USS Abraham Lincoln. I should have gotten to this earlier. It's about to be taken out of rotation and finally given a much-needed rest. More treason from Stars and Stripes and The Guardian. This is treason. And USA Today. More treason. Aiding and abetting the enemy by telling the truth. Sailors on board the USS Abraham Lincoln, stationed in the Middle East, are suffering from severe mental health setbacks, with some attempting to commit suicide, some attempting to jump off the ship because they've been at sea for 250 days, 9 months, without touching a single foot on land. Other reports, we've gone over this, garbage food, sometimes just one meal a day. Relatives are saying they're starving. We get phone calls and letters saying, we're starving, send us food. But $500 million for General Dynamics to manufacture artillery shells that never materialize. Well, Drop Site News is now reporting that Pete Hegseth has appointed venture capitalists from Silicon Valley, wealthy Trump donors, to sit on the Pentagon's Defense Policy Board. Drop Site reports one of those investors is Mark Andreessen. He, I believe, invented Netscape, which was the very first internet browser, and now he is a big investor with, if you know who David Horowitz is, the radical lefty turned crazy conservative, his son is a partner with Mark Andreessen, and they have financial ties to this genius, Donald Trump Jr., as well as Don Jr.'s investments in companies doing business with the Pentagon. From what we know, Don Jr. is heavily invested in at least 7 companies doing business or seeking to do business with our Pentagon. And Don Jr. has a word for it: patriotic capitalism. You love hunting. Suit up. Fight your father's war. No, patriotic capitalism. He owns a piece of SpaceX, one of the military's largest suppliers of rockets, robotics, and satellites. That would be Elon Musk. And I'm going to be talking about this. It's a little, I saved it for last, but the Pentagon just lent $620 million to Vulcan Elements to help Vulcan Elements develop rare earth magnets that are necessary for next generation drones and jets. Okay? The Pentagon lent Vulcan Elements, which Don Jr. is a investor in. The Pentagon lent Don Jr.'s company $620 million, and they develop rare earth magnets. And that's why you keep hearing Donald Trump, the president, going on and on about magnets. This is where Donald Trump got it from. Sometimes he'll just lose his train of thought and start talking about magnets. Don Jr., a patriotic capitalist, he says, Don Jr. is making a huge play in low-cost military drone technology, and that's happening while Pete Hegseth is up on Capitol Hill lobbying for that $1.5 trillion budget for 2027. That's an almost 50% bump in military spending for 1 year. And the reason our sailors on board the USS Abraham Lincoln are attempting suicide while being served sometimes one meal a day, a meal that I've seen pictures, I've shown them on the show, USA Today, it's dog food. We're serving our sailors on board the USS Abraham Lincoln dog food because the Pentagon doesn't care about our soldiers. Hegseth has repeatedly said, America doesn't win wars anymore. Trump repeatedly said, America can't win wars anymore. And they have extended the losing streak. They're proving their point. But Pete Hegseth opened his congressional testimony, 2 months ago? He's opened his last press conference by telling reporters, America hasn't won a war since World War II because our military is too woke and we no longer nurture the warrior culture. That's what he says. And finally, we have a president who gets it. That's what Pete Hegseth says. We have a president who gets it. Gets what? We just lost another war. We lost Iran. Far from woke. We didn't use our warrior culture. Why didn't we use so many soldiers died, but we didn't really send in ground troops because the plan is not to send ground troops anywhere. Because if we send in ground troops, that's a bad deal for Don Jr. Don Jr., the Pentagon just lent him more than $500 million, or his company $500 million. The troops are only there, as far as Hegseth and Trump are concerned, the troops are only there to protect Hegseth and Trump. So Hegseth and Trump can hide behind the troops whenever they're caught wasting billions killing innocent civilians. You saw Hegseth's testimony. The minute you question his lack of preparedness that has resulted in our soldiers dying, he'll say, when you talk that way, you're dishonoring our troops. No, you're dishonoring our troops, you coward, hiding behind the flag and our troops. We spend $1 trillion a year. Hegseth and Trump want it to be $1.5 trillion a year to wage war from above. And the plan is artificial intelligence. The plan is to take soldiers out of the equation because war from above or war with robots is financially and politically lucrative. Time and again, the American people have proven themselves willing to forego, talking about American taxpayers, we have signaled that we will forego health care, good schools, bridges that don't collapse, in order to fund a military that keeps losing wars, but doesn't send too many of our loved ones off to die. That's the message American taxpayers have signaled. And that is the business model for the weapons manufacturers and all the accountants and lawyers and lobbyists that feed off killing people. You squeeze the American taxpayer by making them feel safe, by first making them scared, and then assuring them, Daddy will protect you with the strongest military in the world. And by strong, the people selling this crap want you and me to believe that strong means we have so many high-powered weapons, such shiny advanced technology, we're never going to have to sacrifice a soldier again. All those drone strikes in the Caribbean, those war crimes against alleged narco-terrorists, no soldiers, all drones. That's what Hegseth, that's the goal here. Scare people, scare the American people, make them pay up. It's a shakedown. We'll keep you safe. And then you keep demanding they pay more money. We pay more money because the world, it's a dangerous place. It's a dangerous place. Yeah, it's a dangerous place because Donald Trump is president. And as long as the American people, this is what taxpayers and voters have signaled, as long as we don't have to sacrifice too many of our loved ones, we'll keep paying. We'll keep paying you. More than 20 years in Afghanistan. Why? The Taliban didn't attack us on 9/11. The Taliban did not attack America on 9/11. Did I mention that the Taliban did not attack us on 9/11? Yeah, we know Iraq didn't attack us on 9/11. The Taliban did not attack us on 9/11, but we spent more than 20 years in Afghanistan, and what did we accomplish? The UN out with a new report yesterday that 2.5 million girls above the age of 10 in Afghanistan are forbidden from attending school. What were we doing in Afghanistan for more than 20 years? Well, if you want to answer that question, visit Washington, D.C. Go to Georgetown. Visit the suburbs in Virginia and Maryland. Look at, what are they called, neoclassical mansions with their marble, what are the, porticos? Is that what they're called? I heard Eric refer to a portico share. That's where the Bentleys are parked underneath. So if you go to, you see these mansions, that explains to you what we were doing for more than 20 years in Afghanistan. A lot of people got rich, very, very rich off Afghanistan. Now, I miss Joe Biden. I do. And I think his pulling out of Afghanistan was one of his finest moments. We lost Afghanistan. We bungled the invasion. We bungled every day we were in Afghanistan. But somehow, leaving with our tails between our legs was supposed to be performed with a precision and coordination not witnessed since D-Day. We lost. Losing, it's clumsy getting out of town after you've lost. When you die, you often crap your pants. There's no such thing as death with dignity or losing a war with dignity. I like Joe Biden, but his entire administration was made up of war profiteers. Secretary of State Anthony Blinken, war profiteer, founder of WestExec. His press spokesperson, Jen Psaki, now with her own show on MSNBC, war profiteer. Jake Sullivan, his national security advisor, war profiteer. Some of them came from WestExec. Those are the big lobbyists for war profiteers. And WestExec employees was founded by Anthony Blinken, our Secretary of State under Joe Biden. Secretaries of State are supposed to prevent war. They negotiate peace. You don't get a war profiteer to serve as your peacemaker. WestExec employees infiltrated all parts of the Biden administration, not just in the State Department and the Defense Department, the Justice Department. I think Lisa Monaco was West Exec. Joe Biden loved war profiteers. He spent every Thanksgiving of his presidency inside the Nantucket home of war profiteer David Rubenstein, who founded the Carlyle Group, which is a consortium of war profiteers. David Rubenstein, who Trump fired him from the Kennedy Center, and rightfully so. Biden's Secretary of Defense was Lloyd Austin. Lloyd Austin, war profiteer. Before becoming Biden's Secretary of Defense, he was a war profiteer. General Lloyd Austin, war profiteer. Now, by law, the Pentagon, I got to get new earbuds and a chair that doesn't squeak. Lloyd Austin, war profiteer. By law, the Pentagon is supposed to be run not by a general, but by a civilian. Well, Lloyd Austin, war profiteer, was a 4-star general in the United States Army. In fact, he ran CENTCOM, which is doing a terrific job right now, losing to Iran. CENTCOM sounds like a corporation. It might as well be a corporation because it wastes money and lives and always fails. CENTCOM, that's part of the Pentagon. It's the Middle East, takes care of the Middle East theater. He retired, I'm talking about General Austin, war profiteer. He retired from the military in 2016. According to the law, in order to serve as defense chief, it must be 7 years since you were an active duty member of our military. 7 years. Why? Why is it against the law for our defense chief to go directly from the military into heading the Pentagon? Because we cherish democracy and we know militaries are dangerous. The National Security Act of 1947, militaries are a threat to democracy. So the National Security Act of 1947 mandated that the Department of Defense must be run by a civilian, not a member of the military. Civilian control of our military was one of the great lessons learned during World War II and the Nuremberg trials. You don't entrust your military with the military. You don't let the military decide when to go to war. That being said, the military always advises against war. But once you go to war, they have to give it their all, and they don't quit. Like Powell, General Powell, was Secretary of State. He knew the war was wrong. He's a loyal foot soldier. He wasn't going to speak out. This is how republics die. So the law says 10 years you have to wait after active duty service if you wanted to be Secretary of Defense. So General Lloyd Austin needed a special waiver from Congress. And Congress, by the way, amended the National Security Act of 1947 in 2008. And they said only 7 years. Went from 10 years to 7 years. He got a special waiver from Congress because he had only been a civilian for 4.5 years. This is the same waiver Congress passed to confirm General James Mattis as Donald Trump's first Secretary of Defense back in 2017. Okay? Lloyd Austin never left the military. He was a board member, a paid board member of Raytheon. The time he spent no longer being a general, he went through the proverbial revolving door and sat on the board of Raytheon, along with other things. Raytheon makes Patriots that we're all out of. They also make those Tomahawk cruise missiles we're out of. And Raytheon makes shoulder-fired Javelin missiles that we sold to the Ukrainians to fight the Russians. We gave the Ukrainians money to buy Javelin missiles from Raytheon and Lockheed Martin. They make them together. Raytheon is the same company, war profiteer, General Lloyd Austin. That's where he worked before becoming our Secretary of Defense. He never left the military. He got deeper into it. He was working for Raytheon. And I remember this. It was only 4 years ago. I've never seen anything like this before. In order to sell Congress on giving money to Ukraine to buy our weapons, in 2022, President Biden, right after, this was like in May of 2022, a couple of months after Putin invaded Ukraine, President Biden, trying to get a war supplemental for Ukraine passed, he went to a Javelin missile assembly plant in Troy, Alabama. I have never in my life seen a president be so brazen about who we are as a country. He went to a Javelin missile assembly plant in Troy, Alabama, to sell the Ukraine supplemental to Congress and the American people as a jobs bill. We're not giving weapons to Ukraine. This is a jobs bill. We're going to give money to the Ukrainians, and they're going to use that money to buy our Javelin missiles from Lockheed Martin and Raytheon, which is where my defense chief, General Lloyd Austin, used to work. He said, visit the factory producing these Javelin missiles. He said, we're creating jobs. As though war is good for the economy, which it isn't. I've been over that. War. So the war supplemental, Raytheon did very good off the Ukrainian war supplemental, does very good off giving money to Israel, Iron Dome, Golden Dome, all these things, Sling of David, Raytheon's all into shooting missiles out of the sky. Lloyd Austin, Biden's defense chief, worked for Raytheon before becoming defense chief. And for some reason, it's impossible to audit the Pentagon. They've tried, and they just don't know where the money goes. They can't figure out where the money went. I bring all this up because I'm going to talk about something that some of you are going to be really bored with, but it's important. Lloyd Austin, I'm tying this into Don Jr. and war profiteering on a scale that is beyond imagination. Do you remember I told you the Pentagon lent Don Jr.'s Vulcan company? He's an investor in Vulcan. The Pentagon lent his company more than $500 million. Okay. Why? When did the Pentagon start putting money out on the street, start lending it? Lloyd Austin. he, as Secretary of Defense under Joe Biden, created something called the Office of Strategic Capital. That sounds like a responsible Office of Strategic Capital. What's the office? It's a bank. It's the Pentagon Bank. For whom? For the military-industrial complex. The Pentagon has essentially set up a bank for the military-industrial complex. In order, he set this bank up in order to help, and I wish I were making this up, the mom and pop defense contractors. I swear to you, that's what they're called. The mom and pop defense contractors. I played you the clip of the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, Dan Kane, testifying before Congress this year, asking for a $1.5 trillion budget. And he literally said under oath, a lot of that money will help the small mom and pop defense contractors. Because, I don't know about you, I like my napalm made using an old family recipe. And you can only get that from the mom and pop defense contractors. We have a bank that lends money to companies that people like Don Jr. and Mark Andreessen and all the Trump donors are investing in. Dan Kane is chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff. He is a war profiteer on a level he should be on the Mount Rushmore of war profiteers. He made it all the way up to general. And while he was rising through the ranks of the National Guard to become a general, he went from lieutenant colonel all the way up to brigadier general. General Kane, at the same time, was an entrepreneur in the field of war profiteering. Of course, Donald Trump would make him chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff. While he was serving in the National Guard, a colonel and then a general, he founded the Kane Group, which invested in and provided consulting services to companies from the aerospace, defense, national security, and cybersecurity sector of our economy. Used to be a revolving door. First, you had to leave the military to start cashing in. General Kane became an entrepreneur while serving in our military. Of course, Donald Trump would make him chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff. While he was rising through the ranks of our military, General Dan Kane, chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, you know how much he made? You ready? We don't know. Nobody bothered to ask. Can't find out. I know you have to do financial disclosures in the military. For some reason, can't find out what Lieutenant General Dan Kane, now chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, how much did he make as an entrepreneur / general? Never before. I've never heard of such a thing. A lieutenant colonel, a colonel, and a general who has a side hustle as an entrepreneur. Not waiting to go through the revolving door. And we don't know what his net worth is. Nobody's bothered to ask. We know he has an amazing collection of watches. That I found out. Like $50,000, $60,000 watches. Now, under Joe Biden, General Austin, the Pentagon through its Office of Strategic Capital, that would be the bank, began lending several $billion of your money to military startups, entrepreneurs. And the Pentagon guarantees these loans. In other words, you go to the Office of Strategic Capital, the bank, and you ask for a loan. Don Jr.'s company got more than $500 million, and you get a favorable interest rate, incredibly low. And if you default on the loan, meaning you can't pay it back, you don't have to, as long as you can convince the Pentagon official who will one day be working with or for you that what you manufacture is in the best interests of our national security. So you lent me $500 million. We can't, like General Dynamics, we can't produce artillery shells, but we think it's in the best interest of our national security. I have a job for you after you leave. You should forgive this loan. And that's what happens. Anything that's in the best financial interests of a Pentagon procurement officer is automatically in the best interests of our national security. That's how it works. Except if you're General Dan Kane. You don't wait till you leave to leave the military. You set up shop as a lieutenant colonel. Start your own consulting firm. The Pentagon's Office of Strategic Capital, the bank. You got sailors on board the USS Abraham Lincoln on suicide watch right now. They're being fed dog food, but the Pentagon has billions to lend, including, so far, $500 million to one of Don Jr.'s startup companies, all under the watchful eyes of Pete Hegseth's Defense Policy Board, made up of hedge fund managers and Silicon Valley angel investors. What was only about $19 billion for the Office of Strategic Capital, that would be the bank, when Trump took office again, they had $19 billion to lend. Over the next 3 years, it is now budgeted to grow into more than $200 billion. The Pentagon's Office of Strategic Capital is going to have $200 billion to loan out to start up mom and pop defense contractors. According to the law, which was passed to create this bank inside the Pentagon, it was passed during the Biden administration, one person gets to decide whether or not to forgive a loan that was defaulted. That would be the director of the Pentagon's Office of Strategic Capital. He decides who to lend to whomever he sees fit, and if an entrepreneur like our chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, Dan Kane, or Don Jr. defaults on that loan, it would be up to the director of the Pentagon's Office of Strategic Capital, that would be the bank, be up to the director to decide on whether or not to forgive that loan. Well, be interesting to find out who that director is. He's been there since November 2025. He is a Harvard douchebag by the name of David Lorch. And from what I understand, he has no military background to speak from. That maybe he does. I haven't been able to see any evidence of a military background. But then again, I don't know what Lieutenant General Dan Kane is worth. You know? Top secret, national security. If you find out what entrepreneur General Dan Kane, chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, is worth, that's aiding and abetting the enemy, so we can't know what he's worth. And I don't know David Lorch's military background, but it appears he doesn't have one. But he does have a background on Wall Street, specifically private equity. Now, all private equity is bad. Lorch comes to us from Cerberus Capital, C-E-R-B-E-R, U.S. Capital. Where do I start? I could do 10 shows on Cerberus Capital. Big investors in weapons manufacturers. So, criminal. Literally, I'm not saying David Lorch is a criminal, but he comes from a criminal enterprise called Cerberus Capital. He worked there, and now he's in charge of doling out more than $200 billion in Pentagon loans. Cerberus Capital, criminal organization, they're the sole owner of DynCorp, a military contractor. DynCorp was ordered to pay back close to $30 million that we know of in 3 separate instances that we know of where they were caught ripping off the Pentagon in Iraq. They submitted false claims. They were soliciting kickbacks from subcontractors in Iraq. They were padding expenses. They were charging for services not rendered. They said, oh, we built this hut for the troops. They got busted. Nobody, of course, goes to prison for ripping off money that could go to the VA, that could go to our soldiers. You pay a fine. A fine, it's the cost of doing business. And that's only the tip of the iceberg of how Cerberus Capital has ripped the American taxpayer off. I doubt David Lorch, who is now head of this Pentagon bank, who comes to us from Cerberus, I doubt he was responsible for any of those crimes. But right now, he's responsible for forgiving $200 billion in loans made to companies like Cerberus. And he seems like a pretty forgiving kind of guy. Something tells me if one of the loans taken out by Don Jr.'s company they default on it, something tells me that David Lorch, who heads this new Pentagon bank, something tells me he's a really forgiving guy. And he would say to Don Jr.'s company, it's okay. We all make mistakes. This office, this Pentagon bank, $200 billion, according to ProPublica, expedited a $620 million loan to Vulcan Elements, which Don Jr. has an equity stake in. And according to ProPublica, that loan was made in August of last year. And for some reason, Peter Navarro, Trump's trade advisor, he lobbied excessively for this loan to go through. Why would a trade advisor, fresh out of prison, Peter Navarro, remember, contempt of Congress? Why would a trade advisor in the White House be lobbying for Don Jr.'s company to get a $620 million loan from the Pentagon? I'm not suggesting that this company, Vulcan, will default on that $620 million loan, because when has Don Jr. ever been involved in a business enterprise that failed? What I'm saying is these are low interest loans, which are very profitable for investors, because when you get a loan like that, you pay yourself first. You get your fees off the top of that loan before it ever goes below the line to the company. Fees are baked into the overhead of a startup company. Now, I don't know what percent is skimmed off the top of that loan. Let's say, however, investors, the company, I think it's 1787 Capital is Don Jr.'s company. Let's just say they skim 20% off the top of that $620 million loan. That's a finder's fee. That's how it's done. I got you this loan, and we're going to take our fee now. And by skimming 20% off the top, that's 20% less of that $620 million that Vulcan gets to spend on developing new age magnets that go into drones and jet technology. That would be patriotic capitalism. That's what Don Jr. calls it. Patriotic capitalism. Some of you might remember Trump's Paycheck Protection Program, passed in March of 2020 at the height of the COVID outbreak, when everybody was terrified. What do? Well, crisis is opportunity. You pass the Paycheck Protection Program, and it was a bailout for big business, not people, not the people who lost their jobs. It was to protect what? The job creators? No, to protect the people who are laying off the people, the job destroyers. So you call it what it's not, the Paycheck Protection Act. Nobody's paycheck was protected. Anybody who gets a paycheck didn't qualify for a paycheck protection loan. It was given to the job creators. And you all know how that played out. You saw all the millionaires and billionaires who received paycheck protection loans, even though they either had no employees or they got the loan and then laid off their workers anyway. And those loans went from being loans to welfare. It's forgiven. We're a very forgiving people, unless it's a college loan. But we'll forgive you this. Keep it. Don't worry. And that is what Don Jr. and Pete Hegseth, that's why they want this $1.5 trillion for the Pentagon in 2027. Look what's happening to the USS Abraham Lincoln right now. Don Jr., Donald Trump, Lieutenant General Dan Kane, Chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff and entrepreneur, they don't give a shit about our soldiers, and that's why we keep losing wars. I'm David Feldman, reminding you to stay strong and protect the weak. If you liked any of this, if you're still with me, please like this episode, share it. Thanks to Bob and Mila in the chat room for keeping the conversation civil. Yeah. Subscribe to my newsletter. I know this stuff was hard. I know a lot of it is It's not reported because it's difficult for me to understand. It involves theft from our government and endangering the lives of our soldiers, and it's hard to understand. So I don't know who's left here, but thank you. Next show is Sunday at 6:05 p.m. Thank you.